Good morning, Europe, and good morning, Asia. My name is Sebastian Bersick, and it is my real pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Jean Monnet Chair on EU-Asia Connectivity here at Ruhr-Universität Bochum in Germany. Today, our lecture will deal with EU-India relations, India being one of the so-called strategic partners that the EU has established with Asian countries, the other being strategic partnerships with Japan, with the Republic of Korea, and with the People's Republic of China. 2 months ago, in May, the EU and India agreed to form what they call a connectivity partnership. Leaders also agreed to, for instance, resume free trade negotiations. And the EU framed the leaders' meeting online, a pivotal moment, the first EU-India summit in the year 2000 took place, and a moment, according to Brussels, that further strengthens the EU-India overall partnership. It is our great pleasure to have invited and to welcome Professor Ummu Salma Bava of Jawaharlal Nehru University to our Jean Monnet lecture today, and to speak on that very topic, that is the EU-India Connectivity Partnership, challenges and prospects to strategic cooperation. Professor Bava of Jawaharlal Nehru University is a Jean Monnet Chair on the EU Security, Peace and Conflict Resolution Project. She was a chairperson of the Center for European Studies at the School of International Studies, and also director of the Europe Area Studies program and the Jawaharlal Nehru Institute of Advanced Studies in New Delhi. Apart from that, she also has a extensive policy experience. She was, for instance, guest faculty at the Foreign Service Institute of the Ministry of External Affairs in Delhi. She's one of the leading Indian experts on contemporary Europe, European Union, Germany, and India, with a focus on domestic and foreign and security policy. Also includes the regional integration and organization, emerging powers, international politics, global governance, norms, and peace and conflict resolution, and higher education. She was conferred with Germany's highest civilian honor, the prestigious Order of Merit, that is the Bundesverdienstkreuz, by the President of the Federal Republic of Germany in early 2012. So we have arranged what we could do in order to have an interesting and stimulating discussion here. Contemporary affairs in the Indo-Pacific, India's role in there, and also India's expectations vis-a-vis the EU, who has increasingly demonstrated and is increasingly demonstrating its interest to become a more extensively fledged actor in the region. Salma, may I ask you to start with your presentation.
Thank you, Sebastian. Good morning to everybody in Germany and in Europe, and good afternoon to those who are in Asia. It's a pleasure. I'd like to thank Professor Bersick. It's been a long association with him, and once again, congratulate him on the second Jean Monnet chair, on especially focusing on connecting Europe and Asia, people, power, and policies. And I'm very happy to be part of this lecture series on EU-Asia connectivity. So what I intend to do in the time given to me today for the audience over here is I have a PPT which I will quickly run through while I can put forward my ideas. And what is intended over here is to be just brief bullet points for everybody's attention. And please feel free then to pick up further in the Q&A session. So I'm going to now share my screen with all of you and we will get started. So my presentation is divided into three sections. Basically, I would first look briefly at the EU-India relation, situated for those who are not very familiar with it. Look at what are the conditions which have led to this focus on connectivity and take a more geopolitical, geoeconomic view about it. And in the third and final part, come to the EU-India connectivity partnership and what that then intends to do in the future going ahead from this point in time. For those of you who are not familiar, I think, it predates a very long relationship. It began in 1963. But for us at this point, what is interesting is that the end of Cold War would produce those kind of conditions, geopolitical conditions, which will lead to the transformation of both actors. The European Economic Community transformed from EU into the EU, and India would go on from the Cold War period to the post-Cold War period, adopting economic liberalization in the early 90s. And the nuclear test in 1998, I say, is a very defining moment in terms of transforming the global perception of India. Now, the relationships between EU and India would also undergo a transformation when in 2000, both sides agreed to a summit level meeting, right? And this is an annual meeting. 16 summits have taken place till now. The last took place in May of this year. The last two summit meetings due to the pandemic have been in a virtual mode. We are in 2021, so if anybody's asking, why is it that there is no annual summit in between? We did lose a few summit date lines, and that tells you also that it's extremely important to situate what was happening. So there was an upward revision in the EU-India relations. And in 2004, both sides agreed to the launch of the strategic partnership. This also comes in the backdrop of the fact that in 2003, the European Union had adopted, its security strategy, and it had named partnerships as the vehicle to go forward, and named India also as one of the strategic partnerships. I would call the 2004 strategic partnership a turning point in the relationship. 2005, a joint action plan was adopted by both sides, a very long and extensive plan. One can read about it in many of the articles which are available. I was critical at that point in time that it was a very long plan with very little focus on deliverables, right? And that was one of the big challenges. So 2008, there was a review looking at what can be done. And remember that my being brief over here is only to situate and come up to date with where we are today. But you can see a steady scaling up taking place in the relationship. Now, in all of this, what those who are familiar with the EU-India relations will recognize that, trade has been the cornerstone of the EU-India relations and what defined the EU-India relations from 1963. So it came as no surprise that in 2007, both sides decided to start negotiations on a bilateral investment and trade agreement. Now, after many, many rounds of it in 2013, this got suspended, right? It has not been an easy task on both sides to negotiate. The good news for us, those who are looking at the EU-India relation, is that in 2021, that is this year in May, when the 16th summit took place, it was decided to restart the negotiations. But what was also noteworthy was that it was decided to separate out the different components of the negotiations. That means investment separately, trade separately, and services. Perhaps this would be a way forward. It is now, guided by a high-level ministerial, setting, which means that there is a constant political watch over the decision going forward on resuming the trade negotiations. Okay, having looked at the EU-India relations, I want to move away and now come to what I would call as the changing geopolitics and power shifts, within which one would have to take and locate what I would call as the whole focus on connectivity that we are currently witnessing. The first point which I would draw your attention to is the impact of globalization. Not new in that sense, but the tremendous scaling up which globalization has done to economic processes since 1990, and the introduction of new technology, which has meant that we as a collective human group are, in the first time in our human existence, experiencing so much of the change in such a short period of time, enabled by technology, which has the ability to undercut the impact and the role of states, undermine it at times, and also strengthen it. So two kinds of contradictory things are happening. What it has also created in the process is a complex interdependence, right? So the ability to say that purely only states are the actors is a very wrong assumption of the political system that we're looking at. What you also see is the role of non-state actors. It's not just, one should think of just groups which are outside the sphere of law as terrorist groups, but large companies, organizations, international organizations, which are all part of the everyday matrix of decision making, right? And therefore the pull and push factors are changing tremendously. What this has produced as a collective globally is what we observe is the shift in the economic, political, and military power which is taking place. For those of you familiar with Joseph Nye, I draw your attention to what Nye talks about, the three-dimensional chess set of international politics, and can clearly see that there is a different kind of transaction cost and the characters or actors who are available in each of these three levels that Nye is talking about, right? So power shift is slow, but it is happening. And as the power shift is happening, I draw your attention to what we would call as emerging powers. A group of countries which are positioned all around the globe. It's not just only in the global south. And what is it about these new emerging powers? Also, it's very interesting. At one time, the first attention to them came as emerging markets, and today they're being seen as emerging powers. And two important things contribute to why we should be taking them seriously. Their ability to create new institutions and foster new ideas also talks about their power to influence outcomes. And that is extremely important to our discussion today. And we can close this, looking at what geopolitics and power shifts is creating, is seen from at least a European Western perspective, is that all of this is posing a challenge to existing normative ideas, especially what is called as the liberal international order, right? So there is a lot of assumptions in the liberal international order, but all of this is also talking about how emerging powers are able to challenge or offset or offer some kind of a checkmate to what has already been established since the end of World War II in 1945, and which we can even call, as I would call, as the embeddedness of these institutions, and therefore they resist change in a dramatic fashion. So this changing, geopolitics and power shifts should be the backdrop as we go ahead into the next slides and discuss when we look at connectivity and what is so significant about it. I'd like to situate this in the context of what I just said and bring to your attention a very, very major development which comes to mind when we think about connectivity today. I think there's one word which comes into everybody's mind, and that is the Belt and Road Initiative. Let's quickly, take a tour of the Belt and Road Initiative, and I'm going to draw some, key points out of it for our discussion today to situate it. First, it was launched in 2013. Okay, Chinese President Xi Jinping launched it, and since that time, in 2021, now where we are today, 140 countries have signed up to it. Okay, so there must be definitely some appeal to it that 140 countries have joined it. And next, bring to you just a cross section of countries from around the world who have become a part of it. Okay, 40 countries are in sub-Saharan Africa. 34 countries are located in Europe and in Central Asia. Now, including 18 countries from the European Union. This is an important point for us to keep in mind as we go ahead. What does it mean in terms of being part of ideationally different groups is something which should be part of our discussion as we go ahead. 24 of the countries are in East Asia and in the Pacific. 17 of these countries are in the Middle East and North Africa. 19 countries are in Latin America and the Caribbean, and 6 countries are in Southeast Asia, right? And the next slide that I bring to you will just show you how large is the footprint, has been created as an idea by China. This BRI footprint, okay? The gray areas shows those countries and regions where they have not signed up with China. So if you all look at it, you will distinctly see over here that, there is there is India over here, okay, and then there is this entire North America, and there are these parts of Europe which we see have not become part of the BRI footprint, right? What does that mean? What does that mean that they don't want to join, gain, benefit from one of the largest economic powers, when every country practically in the world today has economic relations with China? So why is it that some countries, despite that kind of a reality, are not engaging with China on this initiative? What is it that makes it, in terms of a transaction cost, that these countries would hesitate not wanting to join in, right? So if this is our backdrop, point number one, the changing geopolitical and geoeconomic context. Second, incredible connectivity project which has been launched by China. What does that mean for this idea of connectivity in a geopolitical and a geoeconomic context? This is something that we are going to be examining. Now, again, let's look at a few points which will help us relate all of this together. In 2014, China became the largest economy in PPP terms, right? Please keep in mind that it was only in 1972 when America would reach out to China under the leadership of President Nixon, and that would be the transformative moment which would bring about this major change which would happen, this opening up of China to the rest of the world. What we have also encountered is, when we look at connectivity, is issues with American leadership and hegemony, especially in terms of the economic architecture and the political architecture which has been created by America. In particular, the period of the Trump administration saw more withdrawal than commitment to the US-led economic and political architecture, right? You saw America basically, relegating or leaving any of its international commitments and not wanting to be at the lead, which also drew attention that any challenges to what I had earlier alluded to as the liberal international order, the challenge to it was not really coming from emerging powers who were outside, but a lot of the challenge was also happening from within, right? In particular, in terms of what Washington would stand for or would not stand for. And that would also have a big impact on the transatlantic partnership, for example. Then China's contribution to the United Nations budget has doubled in this period. And you see increasingly China making use of the UN architecture to forward its ambitions. New banking institutions have been launched. There is the AIIB, which includes 4 of the G7 countries. And we also have, the new development bank, of which India is a part of. And all of this shows that it amplifies one particular actor's influence on global development and finance. This is a point to keep in mind, because on the one side, we have the IMF and the World Bank initiated out of an initiative coming from Washington. And now we have a similar kind of an initiative coming out from the Far East. What does that mean to, how we look at what connects the architecture of global politics, right? So what has this produced? In very short keywords, I would say as an outcome, when we look at it, is that we are all encountering disruptions. These disruptions which span what I would call as the political, economic, and the technological area, right? It also shows that there is a new global economic order which is emerging. It is at the cusp. I would not say the old order has fallen away, but definitely there are signs of a new order emerging and trying to, become, in due course of time, probably the alternative. That is what may be the intention, but definitely something that we need to acknowledge. And of course, we also need to acknowledge that a new political power center is also developing around the world. The BRICS is only one such example of how these challenges are coming. Mind you, all the BRICS countries are not democracies. So what does it mean to our understanding when we talk about that if a challenge should come from one of the countries, for example, India, which is a democracy? What does that mean to the larger understanding of how the geopolitical and geoeconomic shifts are taking place? So connectivity, is not new, but we have to then refocus in terms for our discussion today on what I would call as connectivity 2.0, what we're looking at in the current context, and ask some very critical questions. Are these strategies for connection, or are they disrupting the old and creating new kinds of connectivity, right? So does that mean that what we are witnessing today will necessarily, replace what has been there in the past, or will it be an addendum, or will it be, something which will be parallelly evolving? That's not clear. Second, is it about exploiting power and leadership vacuum, or is it a push to have alternative styles of political authority? This is also another way of looking at connectivity and asking that question. As America, there was a retrenchment of American leadership, particularly during the Trump administration. Did that create or facilitate? That cannot be a simple yes or no answer to it. But these are questions which I think would be worth putting on the table as we go ahead. Third, has capacity building of infrastructure in third countries, provided the new gateway to global leadership? This is also another way of looking at it, because the key word in connectivity today is about the ability to bring infrastructure in third countries. And when one could target that and ask, how does that produce the ability to, re-identify or repackage what we mean by leadership? So leadership through economic reconstruction. A fourth point is, does it offer a new political template of growth? Why do I say that? Because obviously when you look at these countries, they're not all politically and economically packaged in the same way. And especially if you look at the BRI, which I just presented to you, some of the key indicators, then definitely you can see that there is a very different combination of the political and economic template of growth which is being offered. Right? The economic template is of capitalism. The political template is of a single party in power, which has recently just completed 100 years in office. So that tells you about the possibilities of offering alternative templates of political and economic interaction. And then what we also see is the pronounced shift in economic power, the focus on connecting in new ways, right? So there is definitely a new intentionality, and which is why I say what we witness today in terms of connectivity is connectivity 2.0. With this, let me then, make that big jump to look at where the EU-India connectivity partnership stands. As I told you, India and EU have a long-standing relationship from 1963, and the springboard in transforming it happened after the end of Cold War. And the connectivity partnership was only launched this year. So two major developments took place, both in the 15th summit, which took place last year in July, and the 16th summit, which took place this year, where there was a scaling up of the political and economic relationship, and the intention to go beyond looking at only trade, right? So that was the big thing. So that's the political push which has come. I think both actors have been influenced by the changing environment and are, I would use the word, not only calibrating, but they're recalibrating to the new challenges, some of which I just listed out in front of you. Point number two, in 2018, the EU launched its Europe-Asia connectivity strategy, right? So there was a much larger umbrella framework which was already offered. And we find that subsequently, this links up also to what India has been putting forward. So India in 2014, had put forward a look east policy, which was then upgraded in the early 90s. And in 2014, this was upgraded to an act east policy. So that means both sides had their respective versions of connectivity strategies and policies. Targeting, in some ways, you could say India's look east also was in some ways fitting in with EU's Asia connectivity strategy, but not the entire east. Okay. For our discussion today, the point worth noting is that on the summit held on 8th of May 2021, the connectivity strategy was adopted, right? Now, what are the two quick points I want to draw your attention to before I dive into the connectivity strategy and see what is going to work and analyze that? If you look at EU and India, they can be called an economic power couple, right? Now, connectivity is not just about economics, as I mentioned, it's also about the political intentionality. So there is about something done by design. And why is that important? Because the combined market size is of 1.8 billion people. That's what we're talking about. And a combined GDP of 16.5 trillion. So does this combination of EU and India then have the traction to transform what they have agreed to in May this year into something far more dramatic than what is presented to us on paper? And my next slide will, just highlight to you the dimensions of the connectivity partnership as I quickly go through. So 4 areas have been identified in the partnership: digital, transport, energy, and people to people. All these 4 areas are also part of the EU-Asia connectivity strategy. So you don't see any shift happening from that. Rather, one could say that the EU-India connectivity strategy builds on what was already articulated by the EU in 2018, right? And with more specificity to looking at India and the area of, exploration where both the sides will operate is not only in India and Europe, but also to third countries in Asia, Africa has been identified. So that is an extremely important point for us. So what has been the focus over here in digital? Increased access to digital services with high protection of consumer and personal data. Energy focuses on more interconnected regional platforms, modern systems, and environment-friendly solution. Transport focuses on diversified trade, travel routes, linking networks, shorter transit times, and simplified customs procedure. And people to people is about cooperation with education, research, innovation, culture, and tourism. In the next few slides, I have taken up each of these 4 areas, and I'm not going to discuss in detail, but just quickly show it to you so that you get an idea of how this is actually being implemented. So when you look at the digital, the aim is clearly put out, right? So you're looking at how to strengthen the digital in multiple possible ways by establishing connections, but also that how this would then benefit people. So this is still a work in progress as we look at what 5G is going to do. Not everybody has the technology, so this is going to be a challenge area as we try it out. Here are some of the examples for all of you in terms of how this could materialize in the digital arena. Right, so there is the space research, we have smart city projects, we have its benefits, say, in the health sector, there's a digital investment forum, and then participation in high-level technology projects. This is one way of looking at it. The next one over here is energy. And I think as we look at, the year is full of the energy conferences, we are looking at the world going towards a zero emission and how you will have a more green economy, happening. I think this gains all the more in terms of how it can be done and both sides can cooperate, right? These are some of the examples where the partnership in energy can materialize. So along with the smart cities, you're also looking at eco-cities and public-private partnerships happening. Investment in transmission lines, renewables is a big push over here. We've got wind, smart grids, and India has been at the forefront in the launch of the International Solar Alliance. And you can see that there is a synergy possible in terms of both the EU and India working together. Transport is one of the next areas. Again, transport connects up not only with energy, but also with the economy in terms of how to decarbonize it, create better mobility solutions, remember. And at the same time, we've got new arenas coming up, especially the maritime over here. Some of the examples which have been identified in the summit are in front of you. Again, linking up with cities, there's also a national infrastructure investment fund which has been done. India is investing a big ways in metros, in modernizing, mobility within the country, and then taking some of these ideas elsewhere to third countries. And the last, not the least, but one of the most important elements in connectivity is at least the human dimension, or the people to people, right? That is the backbone of any talk or any conversation on connectivity, because it is the ideas of people that have the ability to make a difference over here. So the big pushes into scientific research and innovation, technology and skills. And here are some of the examples in front of you. Through various research funding, Indians have been able to benefit, come to Europe. India has also opened up innovative partnerships, bringing in, educators from Europe to be part of the research framework in India. And then there is an expansion of the kind of academic mobility which can facilitate for both sides. So these were the main elements of the connectivity partnership, which of course as a document is available to everybody. But I think it's this last slide that I have for you will probably hold more important interest for all of you. I think when I look at the connectivity partnership in the larger context of the geopolitical and the geoeconomic changes which is taking place, I would ask that, is it a wake-up call that both sides are getting in terms of the shift which is taking place, right? I mean, if you don't step in to do now reposition, so there's a larger connectivity strategy which the EU has towards in Asia. India has its own connectivity strategy. But given that the EU is India's largest trading partner, we could say that there has definitely been some kind of political reality check to what is happening over here. And that is why there was a new push in the current summit to, kind of flag this and bring connectivity onto the table by getting more specific about it. A second important point, which is worthy of consideration, is to also look at the changing maritime power equation happening in this part of the world where I'm located. And I'm talking about the growing significance of the Indo-Pacific as a concept and as a new strategic reality, right? You've already had 3 of the European countries articulate their Indo-Pacific strategy, and you've also had the EU come up with a document which is getting finished further, right? And that means we're not just talking about maritime waters, we're talking about how the power equation is changing and shifting over here. And in that context, what does the specific message of connectivity mean to not only the other actors in the Indo-Pacific, but also to the larger global community? Why is that important? Because India, for example, has already got a network created through the emergence of what we call the Quad, which has also had its first summit and military exercises taking place, right? Now, the Quad, shows a non-European kind of organization over here, because you've got US, India, Japan, and Australia. And recently there was a Quad Plus in which France took part in this exercise. So clearly there is an element of a new security dimension which has come into being. When we're talking about connectivity, it's not just about securing the sea lanes of communication, but it's also about whether this area in terms of what we say a rules-based order, how would that develop and evolve is a very important point to be put on the table. So in that context, the question for us is, can EU and India really produce the traction to bring about a fundamental change? A strategy has just been articulated in terms of the partnership. Can we look at the preceding years and ask the question whether that offers us some kind of an insight whether India and EU can really bring about a change? Now, EU is not per se a resident power in the Indo-Pacific, but the EU is present through its member states in the Indo-Pacific. And that offers one way of looking at how there can be an addition in terms of the roles that member states bring to augment EU's own position, and why India is willing to engage, given that India is also not part of the BRI initiative. And there are many European countries also which are not part of the BRI initiative. What does that mean to politically create a new kind of instrumentality, right? Now, India's connectivity strategy seeks both presence and influence through different instruments. The one example I have for you, which is very, very recent, is the supply of vaccines during the pandemics. All right, so India has, while it was looking at its own population, also decided to, have a presence through this. And these are going to be important steps in the future as to how EU and India can actually collaborate and do this. Then an important question to ask is, does the EU seek to offset China in Asia by advancing this new focus on connectivity with India? I don't think this is a yes or no kind of a question or an answer. I think it's far more complex. You could say that given that there is already a EU's Asia connectivity strategy, one could read the India connectivity partnership as some ways of not only strengthening the bilateral strategic partnership, but also bringing a much more strong focused attention on India in trying to see what can be jointly developed in a specific time period. Does that work for India? I would say the answer is affirmative yes, but it requires a lot more political intentionality on both sides to produce result on the ground, right? And this, of course, draws one to the policy implications on all sides. I think there's no getting away from the reality over here that we are looking at a highly complex interdependence which has been created, the growing rise of influence coming from different kind of actors. And in this, there is a window of opportunity which is opened up for both EU and India to be able to now, make use of this opportunity through the connectivity partnership to bring about definitive changes. Both as ideational actors who find themselves close to each other, there's a lot they both can do together. The point is, how do you translate ideas into action is going to be an important step moving ahead. So with this, let me now stop the screen that I'm sharing with you, and I come to the end of my lecture and hand the mic back to Sebastian.
Thank you, Salma, so much for your wonderful presentation that really started off with some essential historic information, and then describing, especially in referring to the geopolitical and geoeconomic lenses and aspects, describing the situation that we see in the Indo-Pacific right now, and you very much focused on the elephant in the room, so to speak, and that indeed is China, by also bringing up the Belt and Road Initiative. All attendees, that is the audience, please pose questions in the Q&A via the Q&A function. First of all, you focused a lot on bilateral relations, right? I mean, obviously EU-India, yes, but when we look at EU-India relations, obviously there is a regional level here on the European side. There is a regional organization. The European Union always puts a lot of emphasis on integration, on regional integration, on multilateral cooperation. So with regard to the Indo-Pacific, with regard to the Asian side, so to speak, do you see potential for regional solutions? I mean, the concept of the Indo-Pacific is interpreted by the EU and by India as free, as open, as inclusive, as rules-based order. Wouldn't that also mean that regional solutions are sought? So what about SAARC? What about ASEAN? The Indian Ocean Rim Association. Do you see potential here for multilateral solutions when it comes to those challenges that come with changes in the economic and the political setup?
So quick reply on that, Sebastian. I think the Indo-Pacific is a very large area. It's made up of many sectors. And in these many sectors, what you also find is diverse regional groupings and, which offer possibilities. India's own Indo-Pacific policy is about inclusivity. It says, security and growth for all. It is not an exclusivist policy. But at the same time, India also says that India will have to look out also with whom all it can partner. So if you look at India's own strategic partnerships, it's a very diverse group over here. And some of the regional groupings that you're alluding to are far more active. ASEAN is far more active than SAARC, which suffers from being one which has not been active within the region over here. So there are possibilities that within ASEAN, there is a good possibility for a triadic kind of relation because there is the ASEM partnership already, where EU and Asia are together, and that offers a platform. But I would also see that as the EU articulates more of its Indo-Pacific, and the fact that India also has very strong bilaterals with some of the member states within the European Union. For example, with Germany, we have a strategic partnership. With France, we have a strategic partnership. There will be what I would see is a far more complex kind of parallel initiatives happening. So it could be that there is different activities are focused or nested within different kind of capacities which are available. And that means, yes, ASEAN would be the central point to some extent in this Indo-Pacific that we're talking about. But for example, if you look at green economy, if you're looking at the International Solar Alliance, then we would see a lot more which would be happening within the subcontinent over here, and maybe the European partners chipping in a lot more with India. So one would say that there is no one set kind of idea. I think if you're looking at solutions, the range of solution will also depend on the kind of problem. Is it a more cooperative area are we talking about? Or are we moving from a conflictual area in which we're trying to enhance cooperation? And then what is the transaction cost, which will apply to both players over here, both the EU and India?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. In this transaction costs, and with reference to actors, and meaning that what about the potential for trilateral cooperation and trilateral coordination between India and the EU and especially Japan? Another question is about the potential for cooperation between the EU and the Pacific Islands. So how does this concept of cooperation in and with third countries, as the EU and India have agreed on in their connectivity partnership, how does this apply, especially in relation to Japan and also to the Pacific Islands?
So I think on the trilateral partnership, especially the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, I think you can see the first articulation happening. I would not jump in immediately and say this is the replacement to BRI, because I think one has to look at each of these connectivities as separately standalone. Yes, because the map has so many links crisscrossing, one can easily kind of get pulled into it that one particular kind of connectivity partnership is better than the other, right? But you could frame it the other way around and ask, would the Africa-Asia growth corridor in which India, Japan, and the EU cooperate, wouldn't that bring three ideationally like-minded powers together? right? So when we're talking about normative values underpinning, when we're talking about a rules-based order, when we're talking about it is comprehensive, it is sustainable, it is green, then I would find there would be 4 boxes I can check off and say that this would be a win-win situation. Having said that, the reality is that all these these countries are located on the globe at a distance. So one would have to then be able to overcome the physical limitations in terms of being able to bring resources, investment, people, and ideas into third areas. This is something which has already been put forward in the EU-India connectivity strategy. So I think there can be a lot which can come forward. There can be also a test case. Afghanistan now shows where suddenly as the power vacuum comes, it will be a big question. Who's going to step in terms of development, or will it again slide back into becoming a failed state? So I think there are many examples in which this partnership is possible. The pandemics has shown that as global supply chains got affected, one would have to think of alternatives. You cannot have a single source, single point access, and especially how global public health was something which was really not examined earlier. So I see a lot of areas of cooperation happening. Africa, in fact, is waiting for the vaccines to be delivered to them. And this is where, this kind of a partnership would be a step forward in that direction.
Yeah. All these changes that we can observe here, they take place in an also rapidly changing strategic environment. You briefly referred to the Quad initiative that in March had its first summit, bringing together the leaders of India, Australia, Japan, and the United States of America. The EU is not part of this, right? Some people call this some say that this might be an Asian NATO is developing here. So this refers to this question of the security architecture in the region, whereas we need to know that there are different perceptions of the Indo-Pacific. Actually, where does it start? Where does it end geographically? However, the Europeans, the European Union it is, and member states as well, especially France, but and former member states like the UK, they have a clear, they clearly express their intention to have a more to project their power capabilities to the region, and in your presentation, you are in Asia by advancing this new focus on connectivity with India, right? Now, let me turn this around and ask the inverse question. Does India seek to offset China in Asia by advancing this new focus on connectivity with the EU? Traditionally, strategic independence, rejection of formal alliances, this is what the India's foreign policy was about. However, that is changing, isn't it?
Thank you for the question, Sebastian. I think a short answer is, does India seek to offset China through a connectivity partnership? The short answer would be no. I think what Indian foreign policy is seeking is an augmentation in expanding what it can do with existing partnerships in the context of the changing power shift that one is witnessing. For those who are not familiar, in the last 2 years, we've had a major standoff with China at the borders, which has been very intense. And also violent, and it was never anticipated that after 62 something like this would happen. So it has been a wake-up call for India as well. The matter is far from settled. At the same time, it's a very strange engagement, because we also have a very strong trade relationship with China as well, and it's our neighbor. So there's no getting away from geography, and there's no getting away from the neighborhood. What do you do in such a kind of a tight matrix is you expand your policy choices and options that you have. And I would read the connectivity partnership as one way of augmenting what you can do with partners, right? Because I think the big challenge for countries is how quickly can you bring what I would call as a capacity augmentation and a capability, right? And so while a capability can be acquired, a capacity augmentation will take a lot of time. So when you build robust partnerships, it allows you to have a win-win situation on both sides. As the EU is also adjusting to the fact that 17 countries have become part of the BRI, it's a hard reality check. What is happening to that normative idea, right? In December last year, early this year, there was this wanting to have an investment partnership with China, which has now got stalled in the European Parliament. So the EU's own push on human rights, for example, has come to be the point of reference over here. So I think India is looking at an augmentation. I would not call the Quad as an Asian NATO, because I think the dynamics of it is extremely different. What you did see at the Quad initial first time was a response to the tsunami, which now under the changed conditions is looking at trying to find some kind of maritime presence. It is the first meeting which has taken place, and I think that shows that there is enough traction for it to evolve and grow. But if it becomes extremely narrow, then it would create the very kind of idea that India would not want, which is that India's whole idea is that the Indo-Pacific has to be about security and growth for all. It's not about a narrow vision, but it's a much more bigger vision. Having said that, I think the challenges are also many. There are many sectors, as I said, and it's not possible that all powers can be present over here. So you are going to see multiple or a variable geometry in terms of policy choices being worked out. And I think India is also exercising that in terms of the policy choices. For example, the Quad Plus was about engaging France within this Quad. At the same time, India has its own bilateral exercises, also with France. So I think it's still early days. It has to be seen how the new administration, for example, in Washington, what does Japan bring also to the table? And more importantly, as we recover all globally from the pandemic and come out, I mean, economically, I think all economies have taken a hit. So how are we able to overcome what has happened and be able to push forward ideas? I think will mean that we all go back to the drawing table in terms of converting ideas into reality.
Yes. And especially with regard to the challenge of a recovery of the pandemic, the question of trade and investments looms large here. India has withdrawn from RCEP, is not part of RCEP, neither is the European Union. India and the EU have agreed to push for reforms on the WTO level. You also mentioned in your presentation the need for leadership here, but when it comes to questions of global governance, especially global economic governance, however, you also made clear that there is a lot of uncertainty, right? Uncertainty that enters the system because of threat perceptions linked to the rise of mainly of China, as it's called. Now, one question is that is mentioned here is whether there aren't also opportunities, so to speak. You speak of new institutions and alternative templates. However, would that not also provide for more choices? Wouldn't that be a better world order than the one we have?
So it depends on which part of the globe one is standing when it's looking at these institutions, and what are the terms and conditions under which you can, draw. If you're looking at the financial institutions, is it the IMF and the World Bank? Much tougher conditions. Or are you looking at the AIIB and the New Development Bank? And obviously, for some of the African countries, going with the New Development Bank or the AIIB may be the better and easier and the cheaper alternative, right? Is it the better alternative? Maybe not so in the long term. So one has to also ask is, why is it that this space opens up for new institutions to come up? Is it a problem with the existing institutions in the architecture which is currently existing, the kind of leadership we have over there? Or is it because there is this lack of scope for growth and expansion of the existing institutions that it offers, like I said, the possibility and an opportunity for new institutions to come up? We've also, I think, seen an unprecedented existence of institutions in the current avatar that we see. Institutions normally would not outlast so long as the power shift happens. So there are also interests involved over here, a word which I have not used up till now, in having existing institutions continue. And as new templates are being offered, I think it depends on who wants to join them. So if I were to take the 17 European countries who have joined the BRI, the big question is then, why is it that they found it attractive to join? One would have to look at it in that way. We're looking very often at Asian countries and African countries joining this kind of an initiative. But why is it the Europeans found it attractive? Why is it that they could not find favorable ways in which they could raise money or finances within? So it means that we are seeing definitely a cleavaging between what we would call as the normative values, which have been always packaged and put forward, and the rise of interest-based policies, which is coming forward to a lot extent. And that is something which needs to be asked. Would that then break down the kind of solidarity which one has witnessed in the transatlantic partnership and in the West? And what does it mean for other countries? As democracy, as the political template which has been offered, if that now starts to recede, we talk about the rise of illiberalism, not only in the West, but also in many democracies. I think that the question then in front of us is, there is a different political template or political economic template available in the form of the Chinese model, right? And that then appears, at least for some countries, to be attractive. So question then is, can EU and India find the wherewithal to lead, especially in terms of global governance, right? I mean, both sides have to hear each other out. It cannot be that the concerns of India are left to the side, and then that will push India definitely to look for other platforms. We recently saw India invited as a guest for the G7 summit. It is part of the G20. So there is an understanding, and in a couple of decades, India will be the world's third largest economy. So it will then be speaking with a much more louder voice than it is doing today. The point is, how do both sides engage with this? We have a strong ideational background, but we need to be also present to a reality check where interests are dominating, right? So I think that is where we are. It's a very, very fragile balance as you go ahead in terms of foreign policy. But how do you bring together normative ideas, your interest, and the ability to address some of the critical questions which actually impact both Europe and India together, right? One such platform would be the Sustainable Development Goals. If you look at it, this is something to which we all have signed up. So the 2030 agenda impacts everybody. And if anybody thought that you could get away from the pandemic, then we realize we are far more interconnected than we were. All the economies have taken a hit. So in this kind, there will be a return to some kind of more nationalist thinking, closing the doors. But the ultimate would be, how do you find the courage to find new kinds of leadership in this and continue with the values? Will the values bandwidth, let me close on that, will the values bandwidth continue to sustain, or will it get so narrow and thin that it will be ultimately a more, we are going into a more anarchical way of being, where everybody decides, okay, I am going to make my own deal, right? Nobody's the winner in that. And like I said, the transaction cost will go up for everybody. So how they build partnerships, I think is also going to be extremely important.
Well, this is the agenda that the world is facing, and when we think of climate change, when we think of the digital transformations ongoing, certainly these are all questions and issues that cannot be answered unilaterally, bilaterally, but plurilaterally, if not to say multilaterally. You asked that question: why the EU member states have assigned to the Belt and Road Initiative? Well, certainly there are. These are mostly economic reasons, but I think more importantly at this point is that now there is a lot of hesitance, actually, if not to say increasing reluctance, to get involved, deeply involved with the Belt and Road Initiative. Here, one example could be Italy, right? That is increasingly well withdrawing. When you look, for instance, at Germany. And even in Germany, the industry sector, right, is quite outspoken vis-a-vis China's actions, is outspoken about the need and focusing on the need to respect the universality of human rights. The EU has coined or framed the China as a systemic rival. It's a partner, it's a competitor, but also a systemic rival with regard to the political sphere. So there is an increasing understanding that this balance of interests and values has to be readjusted, refined, and that certainly, or that, as you have pointed out, is not only applicable in the case of the European Union, but also in the case of India. However, as I understand, in the case of India, there are also that domestic dynamics that point to the need to further focus on values and the question of democracy and human rights. Also, the European Union has to do that, right? Because the legitimacy of our, that is to say, of the European project, and also I mean, India as the biggest democracy, largest democracy, rests upon these questions of legitimacy, and values and interests certainly are important here and need to be taken into consideration domestically, but also when it comes to foreign policy and international relations. Time is already up, unfortunately. Thank you very much for your lecture here, Salma. That was very thought-provoking to see how India is actually, as you called it, looking out for augmenting the reality of foreign relations, and to also change its role, so to even question the rejection of alliances, and and to see how the Indo-Pacific has become an important part of EU-India relations, and how connectivity plays into that. So, yeah, thank you to the audience, and thank you to those of you who participated by posing questions. We look very much forward to welcoming you again in November, that is after the summer break. And let's hope that until then, the pandemic and its implications will have receded further. So bye-bye from Europe, bye-bye from Ruhr-University, Bochum, and have a nice and pleasant summer. Bye-bye.
Thank you.